We're back, of course, talking FF7 Rebirth. We're also talking Final Fantasy 16. This is information I wanted to talk about a day or two ago when it first came out, but we were doing other shit at the time. I almost talked about it in the Nomura video, the interview that we looked at, but that video is already long enough, and I figured we'd talk about this probably for at least a few minutes. So anyways, according to Square Enix, Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth and also Final Fantasy 16 did not meet their expectations. We don't know what that means exactly. They've said stuff like this before with other games that I guess weren't like really successful. Like Guardians of the Galaxy comes to mind. That was a game that was like, critically it seemed like to do pretty well, but it just didn't, I guess, make the sales or the money that Square Enix was expecting. I suppose with stuff like this, they tell us what their expectations were, right? Because with like something like Guardians of the Galaxy, like I'm not speaking to the quality of the game. It's pretty obvious that that game was going to like have a hard time doing well just because of Avengers. They dropped the Marvel's Avengers in 2020, and that was obviously very widely panned, right? It was a live service game. I didn't keep up with it, didn't really care about it, didn't play it or nothing, but it is obviously was not very well received by the majority of people. And then like a few years later, you try to drop yet another Marvel-related game. Even before we get to Marvel's Avengers in 2020, we're already post-Endgame at that point, so there's already a bit of Marvel fatigue. It's kind of been there for a long time for some people, but Endgame was at least a pretty damn good movie. And at that point, it's like you're kind of coming into the Marvel hype a little late at that point. Like it took you all the time until after fucking Endgame comes out to drop a Marvel game. Not to mention Guardians of the Galaxy is a couple years after that. Something we talked about before on the channel with like something like First Soldier that dropped in like 2021, right? But it's like we're pretty deep into the battle royale genre being out, right? Y'all are choosing like very late into like the hype of the battle royale genre to make a battle royale game. And there's other problems with First Soldier, obviously being a mobile only game, but still, it's like the Square Enix has this like weird kind of timing thing. Certain stuff they choose to hop into it a little late. Maybe that's why they're so like gung-ho with like the AI blockchain NFT shit here the last like couple of years, maybe trying to get in on the ground floor of that shit. But that's obviously stuff that a lot of like the fan base is not really interested in. Anyways, back on topic, 16 and Rebirth underperforming. I mean, this isn't really news. I mean, we've talked about this before. Like this financial report that came out, very recently, it's a report from May of this year. But we've heard this before. We've known for a while now that, 16 didn't like meet their expectations, and we've known, of course, that Rebirth didn't either. We've talked about that a lot over the last, 6 months, almost 7 months at this point. In the report, they say, in the HD Games subsegment, we released multiple new titles, including major titles such as Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, but profits unfortunately did not meet our expectations. I think some of the headlines on this are a little bit grabby because they obviously mentioned specifically 16 and Rebirth, but it's not just about those games. It's not just those games underperforming, it's just the ones they choose to like talk about in the report, right? They also mentioned Foam Stars like almost right after this. Not that, Foam Stars was necessarily a big release, but they don't just talk about like the big games. And as for like Rebirth, kind of underperforming, again, we talked about this a lot over the last, several months. I think we were even talking about this before Rebirth came out, that it was probably going to do worse than Remake just because they moved it to PS5 only. Now, obviously, that is for the better. Overall, for the Remake trilogy, for the games that we're playing, it's better that they move generations. Everybody in on the ground floor of the Remake project at like the end of the PS4's life cycle, right? Pretty much, because the PS5 was coming out the same year. At that time, you had like 100+ million or something like PS4 sold in the world, but there wasn't really that much people buying it, right? It sold a couple million in the first week or so, a couple days, whatever, sold a couple million, but then like the sales slowed down. I mean, it wasn't until we got an update in like 2023, I think like September 2023 or something, maybe like exactly a year ago, I guess, where like they'd finally reached like 7 million. It took them a long ass time. You have like the second game in your remake project moving to a different console generation where it's exclusive to that generation. You're expecting people essentially to buy, a several $100 console, but also the $70 game. That's quite an investment. Even I felt burned whenever they first like revealed Integrate and Epicenter Mission, where that shit was like, next gen only at the time, right? It's PS5 only. Like Integrate, I understand because that's like the enhanced version. But you have a DLC coming out for FF7 Remake, which at that time is only on PS4. And the DLC for its next-gen exclusive. Like, that shit sucked. And personally, I could see it coming from, like, a mile away that Rebirth was going to underperform compared to Remake, right? Because, for one, by the time that Rebirth is coming out, you have, like, half or less of the install base that the PS4 had at the time of Remake coming out. But also, it's, going to be a PS5-only game, a console-only game. But also, it took, Remake all the way to 2023 on the PS4, PS5, and PC to reach, like, 7 million sales. So, like, of course, Rebirth is going to go nowhere near that on just one console with a much smaller install base. And then you look to like other like PlayStation exclusives, like the Spider-Man games or the God of War games that do these insane astronomical numbers, and there's just clearly not like an interest for the Final Fantasy series. As sad as that is to say, I love Final Fantasy 7, I love the Final Fantasy series, but they're not like console sellers. They're console sellers to you and me, right, for the most part, because we're fans of Final Fantasy. That's the only reason I bought a PS4. It's the only reason I bought a PS5. I played other games since, but they did sell a console to me. But clearly, like the general PS4 owner out there just doesn't really want to play Final Fantasy 7. And obviously, Remake and Rebirth didn't have like bad launches, but they're just not, doing the numbers that Square Enix is expecting or what, other exclusives are doing. It's obviously something else that really hurt the Remake project is it being exclusive, right? We talked about this a lot, obviously, over the last like several years, but we got to bring it up when we're talking about this subject. But, Remake being PS4 only, and then, eventually Rebirth being PS5 only, being console only for, like, an extended period of time. It took, like, quite a while before, Remake came to, like, Epic and then eventually Steam, right? Like, a year and 8 months, I believe, off the top of my head, before it came to Epic, and then, like, more than 2 years, I believe, to come to Steam, something like that. Like, it took a long-ass fucking time. Rebirth might hopefully be shorter. We're seeing that with 16. 16's, coming to PC, or already on PC as of right now, actually. A little more than a year after release. But clearly the exclusivity is hurting the Remake project a little bit. I don't know if they can change that with the third game. I don't know if there's already, like, something in place where, like, the whole Remake project had to be PlayStation exclusive. Maybe they can shorten the window of the exclusivity. Maybe it comes to PC sooner. I don't know if they're going to do that or not. It'd be nice if, like, with the third game, if they could find a way to do, like, PS5 and PC day one. It'd be fantastic. It'd be the best thing possible for the Remake project. But even if they could do that, it's kind of a little too late, right? Because we're coming up on the last game in the Remake trilogy, right? And even if you could day one PC, it's like, well, there's still these other 2 games that you technically need to play. They'll probably market Part 3 just like they marketed Part 2, right? Just like they marketed Rebirth, where it's like, you don't have to play the second game. We'll just have a video package to kind of recap everything that happened, right? They'll probably do something like that with the third game, but ultimately it is the third part of the trilogy. So the majority of people are going to want to play the first game and the second game and then the third game. But at that point, if you haven't already jumped into the FF7 state, you got to buy, 3 separate games technically on whatever platform you're playing on to really enjoy and play the whole story. One of the things where it's like a little too late. Even if they day one PC for the third game, it's like, well, we're kind of at the end already, so I don't know if it even matters. One of the things that makes you wonder how, like, the Remake project would be today had it been, like, PlayStation and PC at least day one, right? Or if there's no exclusivity at all, if you just did, PlayStation, Xbox, and PC, whatever you want to do. Just, no exclusivity. Just, like, trying to make this game as successful as possible day one with, like, Remake and then also Rebirth and now going to the third game. If they were just available on all platforms, how much better received it might be. But again, we're falling into that too little too late category, right? Because they had their one shot at remaking, their most successful Final Fantasy game, Final Fantasy VII, right? And they kind of shot themselves in the foot with the way they handled it, with exclusivities and, the potential changes to the story, which obviously was, like, freaking people out a lot, and then split it up into multiple, parts, burn some people, and then getting people in on the ground floor of it with, the end of a console generation and forcing people to have to buy another console to play the second part and then also the third part, so on and so forth. Again, we talk about this a lot. For Final Fantasy 16, it's not a game that I can really speak on too much because it's not one that I covered a lot on my channel. We did videos here and there for it. I did buy it and play it day one. I enjoyed it, but it suffered from similar stuff, right? It was a PS5 exclusive, so a smaller install base than, again, what Remake had on the PS4. But also, it's very action-oriented. A lot of people had problems with the action kind of combat in Remake, right? And 16 goes full on into that. It's a mature-rated game, which also, depending on the game, it can hurt it, because it doesn't have a T rating, so there's, a lot of people that aren't going to buy it because it's M-rated, it's mature, so they can't buy it for their kids, that type of shit. Obviously, there's still, M-rated games that sell astronomically well, but that is something that at least seems to affect the sales of games sometimes. Again, it seems like the exclusivity is something that's been hurting Square Enix for a while now. That's why we're seeing them want to move away from that in the future, right? I think they talk about that in this recent financial results briefing, right? That they want to move into, dropping their games on other platforms. And it's like, man, it's one of those things, again, going back to it, if they were just already doing that with, 16 and the 7 Remake project, like, how much better these games might have done if they weren't, forcing them to be on PlayStation only. It's funny, too, because there's probably old videos on this channel, because I've been covering, the Remake project since 2015. There's probably videos back in the day of me, like, bitching and ranting about it being, like, PlayStation only, probably because I was on Xbox at the time. But, like, not one to buy PS4. I think it's stupid. Why is it exclusive? Blah, blah, blah. And all the time later, it's kind of come full circle where Square Enix is like, well, we probably shouldn't have done that. We probably should have had our games on all the platforms. And it's like, no fucking shit. That's how you make your game as successful as it can be. But, my dudes, that's more or less the video. I mean, what else can be said? We've talked about this subject a lot. We've kind of said everything I've said in this video before in other videos. Like, this isn't really new shit, right? It's a more recent kind of report of this stuff, but it's stuff that we've talked about a lot. And while I do think, like, Remake and Rebirth are fantastic games, it's like almost every step of the way, Square Enix did everything they could to, like, make them not as successful as they could be, right? Like, they almost, like, forward, like, wanting the games to underperform in some ways, what it feels like to me, with the way they handled kind of everything every step of the way. It sucks, too, because, I'm a fan of Square Enix. I'm a fan of the Final Fantasy franchise. I'm a big fan of Final Fantasy VII, but when I look at it from, like, the outside and see how, like, the Remake project has been handled, with all the things we talked about in this video, it's like, what other outcome could there have been? It's almost like when you see, like, a trailer for a terrible movie and you're like, that movie's gonna bomb, and then it does, right? It's like, how did nobody that's making this movie see this? How could they not predict how terrible this movie would be? And it's kind of like that with Remake, not to say that the games look bad, but just, like, everything that I've seen over the last, like, several years of how, like, everything's been handled, I'm like, yeah, I'm not surprised it's not making as much money as you want it to. Anyways, yeah, I've said my piece. You guys have heard me talk about this shit before if you've been here for a while. It's not a surprise to me that 16 and, Rebirth aren't doing the numbers that Square Enix is expecting, but what are their expectations? Do they think, like, overnight that, like 20 million fucking PS5 owners were just going to be like, I guess I'll buy a fucking Rebirth for some reason, even though I haven't played Remake? I don't know exactly what they're expecting, like, 16 and Rebirth, like, sales numbers to be when it's a PS5 exclusive thing that they're doing. but they're doing about what I thought they would do. I never predicted like sales numbers or anything, but they're about around the range that I thought those games would probably do, given their fucking limitations. Anyways, that's the video. Subscribe to if you guys are new. Search works in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, @DavidYT. That's it.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Low Gain, or leave it like Cobain.